Hi, Hank Green, and welcome back to my video series in which I teach you how to knit because I'm sure it's been kind of hard getting the feedback that you've gotten about that SciShow episode that you did on knitting. But in my heart of hearts, I do believe that the knitting community is probably very forgiving because we make mistakes and we have to forgive ourselves. And so I also see us as a community that's very supportive and willing to teach because we are willing to learn. So because I know that you love learning, I'm making this video series for you to teach you how to knit so that you now have a little bit more practical knowledge about our community and the different things that we have to work with whenever we are making knitted goods. If you're not Hank Green and you're watching this, then this is a really great tutorial series if you are a true beginner, which means that you've never even fiddle-faddled with yarn or knitting needles before. This is a great place to get started. And hi, if you've never seen my videos before, my name is Lindsay at Doing the Most Design. I run content creation here on TikTok and also a little bit on YouTube, solely focused on knitting and crochet. I do tutorials, guides, supportive stuff, stories about my own experiences as a fiber artist, and all of it is for your edification. So if you would like to get more content like this, then go ahead and follow my account. This video is the final segment of a longer, can you believe it, 18-minute video that I recorded in which I had several topics that I covered. This is the third portion of that, so I split it up into smaller chunks. In this video, I'm going to talk about what is called yarn put-ups. So that's actually a term that I had to learn in order to make the video. And a yarn put-up is the format that you will find yarn being sold in a store, or if you're buying online, a digital store. I talk about the different formats of that and then what you need to do if you buy one kind of format versus the other kind of format. So this is going to be useful for you if you are trying to step into a yarn store for the very first time. And I do highly encourage that if you have access to a local yarn store, that you do support the folks who run that. That's almost always a small business, and greater odds than not that it's run by women. And then in a lot of cases, also women of color or indigenous people. And so I think if you can make that effort and opportunity to go into a local yarn store and support them, it's a really great way to feed back into your own personal geographical community as you participate in this larger universal knitting community. Okay, so if you learned something from this video, don't forget to tag Hank Green down in the comments so that he can see that I'm making these videos specifically for him. But I also am glad that you're going to be getting something out of it as well. All right, let's get into that topic. The most common way that you can find prepackaged yarn is going to be in a shape like this, and it's called a skein, S-K-E-I-N. Sometimes you'll hear people say skein, but if you look it up in the dictionary, it's called skein. I'm not trying to gatekeep, I'm just letting you know what the dictionary says. And so with something like this, typically what you'll have is a piece of paper that goes around the center of it. We call that the ball band. The ball band will have information on the outside, and then some brands will also have a very easy pattern for you to do on the inside of the ball band. And for a product like this, you will have a yarn that is usually a center pull. So you'll find the hole either side, and you'll dig around in there and you'll pull out the yarn and you can start knitting from that. And then eventually this starts to wither away and collapse. And I think that's kind of fun. Other knitters find that that is the way that you start to create knots in your yarn, so they don't really care for that. And then another way that you can do is that there's always a way for you to start unraveling from the outside. So one of the most common ways that you can find yarn already balled up is going to be in a skein like this. You can also sometimes find yarn that's already packaged up and almost has a ball shape of its own, but this is actually wound up yarn. And in a moment, I'll talk about if you find a hank of yarn, get it, Hank, Hank Green, Hank, then I'll explain to you how you can go from a hank of yarn to something similar to this by creating yarn cakes. But another way that you can find yarn already available to you will be in a shape like this, which is called a yarn cake. Sometimes the marketing or the advertising for it, the labeling on it, might call it a cupcake. This is going to be a situation in which you can typically do a center pull from the top of the yarn cake, or you can start to unwind it from the outside. It really just depends on your preference and then what kind of yarn holder you have if you have a yarn holder. You can also find yarn in twisted up hanks, and so double check with your local yarn store about whether you're purchasing a hank or a ball or a skein. But for a hank of yarn, you will need some additional materials that if you're a beginner, you probably don't have on hand. And I don't recommend that you buy these But what happens is that you cannot knit directly from a hank. You have to spin it up into another shape. And I do have the tools necessary to make one of these. The first thing that you need is called a yarn swift. It looks like a big umbrella without the actual covering part. And you put the hank of yarn around it, and then you're able to then siphon off the yarn bit by bit. You put that yarn onto what's called a winder, and sometimes winders can be mechanical or sometimes they are hand cranked. Mine is hand cranked. And so that will wind up into something like this. And your local yarn store is probably likely to have a swift and a winder. And sometimes for a fee, sometimes for free, they'll wind it up for you while you wait. Lastly, the way that you might find yarn just out in the wilderness might be as a yarn ball. These are hand wound. It's rare that yarn balls are sold at yarn stores, but I did visit a resale shop in Ithaca, New York, where they would sell for $1 just little balls like this of a variety of yarns. They didn't have a lot of that yarn, but it's like you could get a little bit of a sample. And I did make a project with some of the yarns that I bought for $1 that were just balled up like this. This typically happens once you have been doing a center pull from your skein, or you've been doing a center pull from your yarn cupcake, and it turns out that it's starting to collapse into itself. So then you just kind of take matters in your own hands in a very literal way here, and you just start winding it up so that it's organized and you're not going to have a big knotted mess in the end. It is possible to create these so that they have a center pull as well. That's maybe a time for another video, but I hope that you learned a lot. I am confident now that you know enough to be dangerous in a yarn store, and that you'll have a lot of really interesting questions for the staff at your local yarn store. I also hope that they teach you a lot more about the different fibers that they have or the brands that they carry, especially because there are so many amazing US suppliers of sheep's wool, and then also alpaca, Angora, and whatnot. So I hope that you have a really fun time. I think that now that you have enough knowledge, you can go into a yarn store and appreciate all of the variety in colors, but also all of the actual intricate knowledge that there is just residing in a yarn store. And then I also hope that you find that it is the most difficult escape room for you to leave, at least with your pocketbook in, in one piece. So my biggest recommendation for you is just to start off with a single small either ball, skein, or hank of yarn. All right, if you've made it to the end here, thank you so very much for watching this video all the way through. I do want to point out that the first video in this series covers yarn weights and knitting needle gauges. And then subsequent videos in this series are going to teach how to do the long tail cast on method, how to do knitting and purling stitches with consistency. I do plan on making a video on how to make stockinette stitch and garter stitch. And then I might do something else where I basically guide you into knitting your first swatch and explaining to you how a swatch is used for determining whether you are knitting on gauge for a garment, and then maybe helping you to figure out how to knit your first square or like washcloth or something along those lines. I'm still trying to figure that part out. So anyway, don't forget to tag Hank Green down in the comments so that he knows that I'm making this video series specifically for him, so that he can, you know, make some amends with us as knitters and understand that there are some people who are willing to reach out and have dialogue with him. All right. Thank you so much and have a great one. Bye-bye.